Lights up!
Today with 3 cast members from our April main stage production of The Lovely Bones. Welcome Ava, Andrew and Isabella.
Hi. Thank you.
Now Isabella, you are, this is your second?
Yes,
second production with...
Third now.
Last of the Housemans, Sense and Sensibility, and now The Lovely Bones. Now you play...
I play Susie Salmon.
And she is?
She's a 14-year-old girl who gets murdered and she goes up to heaven and she looks down on her family and tries to guide them in the right direction of solving her murder and finding her murderer.
So we see it very much from her point of view?
Yeah, I'd say so.
So from her heaven, and is she watching from her family and her friends and trying to manipulate the action?
Yeah, I'd say guiding the people around her who were close to her in her life, guiding them in the right direction to find Mr. Harvey.
Well, because we do know, this is no spoiler alert, dear listener, we do know at the very beginning of the play who is the perpetrator of the crime, which is, of course, Andrew, our new member to PTC.
Hello.
Playing...
George Harvey, murderer extraordinaire.
Yeah, he's a bit grim, isn't he?
He's a horrendous character.
But fun to play, surely, because of that reason.
Yeah, very fun. A bit different. The only really suspicious character in the whole cast, so I'm surprised it takes the detectives that long to find him.
They're not very good, are they, dear listener? They're not very good at detecting.
No, they're not.
Because, I think if you sort of, had a line-up, it would be pretty obvious that it was...
Yeah, the rest of the cast are all so nice and friendly and family-orientated and just love the sort of small-town vibe. And then there's this one creep who lives next door and you think,
And he very much is a creep and a loner.
He is a creep and a loner, yes, which is why I was cast.
And then we now have Ava, who's also new to PTC, so big welcome to you as well, my darling.
Thank you very much.
And you play...
Lindsey Salmon.
And who is Lindsey Salmon?
Lindsey is the middle child of the Salmon family.
Oh my God, does she have middle child syndrome?
Completely.
Yeah, excellent.
I do have to keep reminding everyone who I am, and that I am part of the family.
In the play.
And she is Susie's younger sister, and while Susie is in heaven, we watch Lindsey grow up and deal with the aftermath of having such a trauma happen in your family. And she is sort of Susie's foil in the play.
So Susie is 14 when she's murdered. How old is Lindsey at the beginning of the play?
About 13.
About 13. And then we see her story arc of her growing up, really basically replacing Susie's life, I imagine.
Yeah.
So how does Susie feel about this? Seeing her her younger sister now being older than she is.
Yeah, I think Susie sees a lot of herself in her sister as she grows up, with all the things that she could be doing, the people that she could be meeting, just the life that she could have had.
It's quite tragic, isn't it?
Yeah, and throughout the play there are a few moments where Susie's watching down on Lindsey, and she says things like, I would have never known this if I was with you, but because she's looking down at her, she's able to find out little things about her sister along the way that she wouldn't have known otherwise.
I'm assuming that the death of a child is obviously completely traumatic, but for the children in that family, how does it affect them as a unit?
We've had a lot of conversations about this as a cast to try and establish that family dynamic, and the other Salmon sibling is called Buckley, who is much, much younger, and the difference between the way that Lindsey and Buckley are able to process what happened is that Buckley is kept largely out of the know, whereas Lindsey's exceptionally smart, and through the play the cogs begin to turn in her brain about what happened, and we quickly see her become an adult, a sort of surrogate adult in that family.
So she has to grow up pretty quickly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I almost feel like for Buckley it's more about how it's impacted the dynamic of the family rather than necessarily losing, because he's so young. Maybe it's not so much about losing Susie, it's almost more about how the death of Susie has just broken the family, and the effect that has on Buckley. But of course for Lindsey, because Lindsey and Susie have had such a close connection, had that friendship really established. I think it's, for Lindsey, it's not only about the breakdown of the family, but also about losing a sister and someone who's so close to her.
I hope you're feeling guilty, Mr. Harvey, when you're listening to this.
Sociopaths feel no guilt.
So you come in as... how long have you been living next door to the Salmons?
About 5 years, I think.
Okay,
So
you're not a complete blow-in.
Not a complete fresh-faced person, no.
And how long do you think you've been... Because I'm assuming that this isn't this is a premeditated murder. It's not on a whim.
Yeah, no, it's certainly not a whim. It's planned. So he's made this lair that he's going to snare some
so this is
unsuspecting stranger in.
A den, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't get the impression he's tracked Susie personally.
Right.
I just think he's, got some serious issues. And he starts off by killing animals. So you don't see this in the play, but this is sort of backstory. He starts off by killing the town's animals, and it's blamed on another teenage boy. And that's clearly an attempt to try and control his baser instincts.
So we think he has sort of urges to take lives,
urges.
Whether that be animal or... So he's killed before?
He's killed before, yeah. He's killed 4 or 5, all women before. And you see the sort of spectres of them later in the play. But Susie is the sort of pinnacle of that. She's the oldest.
She's the oldest,
She's the oldest person he's killed. And she's the one who finally tips him over the edge into madness.
Because we don't really see the police really taking it seriously that you could be the killer. Because your father, Lindsey and Susie's father, he has an inkling, doesn't he, from quite early on, that Mr. Harvey is a wrong 'un. And it seems to me in the play that everyone sort of dismisses this, quite frankly, a very plausible theory. But that seems to be sort of dismissed by the police because, well, a little spoiler alert, should we do a little one? There is no body.
There is no body.
So without any body, exactly, then that's the sticking point of why they can't arrest him.
Yeah, they can't just arrest him on no grounds. They need something to go off and they don't have anything. And just because Jack's obsessed with them doesn't give them enough to...
And it's understandably obsessed, and you can imagine that in real life that a father would be obsessed with who killed his daughter, so it's all very plausible. But you get away with it.
Well,
or does he? So now let's talk about the sort of themes within the play, because I've just touched on the fact that it was a book by Alice Sebold. It was written, I want to say, about 20 years ago.
2003.
And then it was made into a film, and then very recently has been turned into a play. So let's touch on the basic themes of the play itself. So we have obviously the murder of a young teenager.
Yeah.
What else do you think the themes are?
There's grief and how people react to grief, and how, of course, it's different for everybody.
And how families can either implode because of that, fall out of something very tragic happening, or stick together, or become closer.
Yeah. And it's interesting to see the sort of journey that the family go on as well. Because I really think it is a roller coaster with how they fall apart, and then I feel like at the end they do sort of come back together again. Yeah,
I think you're right. I think that sort of...
If that's not too much of a spoiler, I don't know.
Well, it becomes full circle. I think with you, Lindsey, you then seek solace in other relationships, or just one relationship alone. She's a monogamous kind of gal, is our Lindsey.
The podcast can't hear me blushing.
So you have a little beau in the play.
I do. He's called Samuel. Susie says he's so cool.
He is so cool.
So Susie, did you fancy Samuel at any point?
Well, no, because we are in the same year.
Oh,
Me and Samuel, we're in the same year. So he's a year older than Lindsey.
Of course, of course.
So he's in the same year as me. And so
But
he's
Susie isn't cool.
No, she's not the coolest.
Whereas Samuel is cool.
Samuel is well cool, isn't he, though? So now, Susie, do you have any romantic ties within the play?
There's racing.
Oh, the lovely racing.
Yeah.
Who doesn't love Ray?
Yeah, that slowly gets a bit more complicated as the play goes on, and I can, I'm looking down at Ray getting on with his life.
So he's your first love, isn't he?
Yeah.
So your first kiss.
First love, first kiss.
Oh, and then...
Ticking all the boxes.
And then tragically torn away from that. And then you see him getting on with his life.
Yeah. And he becomes...
Without you?
Yeah, he becomes close with Ruth.
Now, Ruth is...
A slightly alternative. Yeah, she's sort of in her own world quite a lot of the time. But I think Ray and Ruth really find each other because they're both lonely. And so they end up meeting in the cornfield quite a few times. And Ruth particularly, and Ray, but Ruth particularly, makes it her quest to really help out with solving the murder. And I think Ruth is a way that Susie's able to make contact with the people on Earth and guide other people towards the
So she
murder.
sees dead people, is that what you're trying to tell me?
Basically, yeah.
Oh, it's Sixth Sense the play. Now, we ought to talk about the set itself.
Yes.
And also other elements that our incredible creative team have put together.
Yes.
So for those who come regularly to Putney will know how big our stage is. And this time we've done something quite different, basically stripping it all back. The whole length and breadth of the stage is being used. So it's a big area.
Nowhere to hide.
And you, my darling, are on stage virtually, hold on a minute, all the time.
Attention seeking.
Yeah. So now, how are we feeling about being on stage all the time? Because even if you're not in a scene, you're sitting round the edge. So how does that work from a creative point of view, Andrew?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think it gives the audience a different perspective because they're always able to check in on what character is where and who's doing what. But it also makes the whole piece a bit more inclusive and a bit more alive. You know, and obviously the whole play is based around different areas in heaven and hell and heaven and earth and the family house.
But that can be hell, darling.
It can be, especially
when Grandma Lynn comes along.
So yeah, I've never done a play like that before.
It's quite exposing, isn't it, I think?
Yeah.
The way, or one of the major themes, I would say, within the play is this exposure of the private, how the private becomes the public. And from an acting standpoint, I don't know what you guys think, the nature of how abstract and how the sort of vignettes that you get to see through the show, it is all exposed to all of the other actors. We're all privy to what is going on, particularly in the Salmon household. And that's so important to establish in terms of how this event shapes the town and the relationships within it as well. It would be such a shame for the audience not to be able to see us on stage all the time and feel this presence of the town constantly.
Such a good point of saying it, actually, because it becomes a really cohesive yet fragmented. And as the story arc continues, it's how that impact on everybody, not just the characters that the actions involved with them, but how we all react to it. And I think that's great that you're absolutely right with the townsfolk, how mistrust over other people, you suddenly see how those fractions come to light. The police questioning Ray, they question Ray, don't they? This poor kid. So that's really interesting, but how that affects your viewpoint from it from an audience member as well.
There's also the interesting part that Susie is on stage the whole time and the audience can see her do everything, but none of the rest of the cast can see her.
No, we were just talking about this earlier, saying it's so easy to forget that we can't see her. And I think you're right. I think what will become really apparent to the audience and how much more powerful it'll be ignoring her.
Yeah, because when you lose someone, your whole life becomes defined by their absence, and especially for the family, every scene they go through in life for the rest of their lives will be defined by the lack of one of their family members.
Yes, absolutely.
And so for the rest of the town, they're sort of interacting, going day to day, consciously aware that, previously Susie would have been there with them, experiencing all these moments, and the audience can see her trying to get back into that world and just can't.
And I think also it's more devastating because there's no body. So you have the finality of a funeral. To have that moment of, as you rightly say, to say goodbye. So I think it's always lingering there, that where is she? Which is...
And different characters have different perspectives and different ways of dealing with their grief and different ways of coping with Susie's departure and the lack of closure. And
I think that's beautifully done, actually, how it impacts every individual and how they lean into either each other or don't. Now, what we haven't mentioned...
Yes.
The music.
The music.
It's like its own character.
We have a soundtrack that accompanies the play. Now, I've never seen anything like this at Putney. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen it in any play. So the amazing Nick Wells has composed a whole soundtrack for this play, and it really is magical. How does it feel for you, Ava, when you've been listening to it, and how does it bring more to the scenes that you're doing?
It's the cinematic quality of it. It makes each scene feel more like a moment in the story of this town, and it's like choreography. It's often really overstimulating, not to act with, but to watch, because everything is heightened by the music, and it brings out all of the undertones that the quick-paced nature of the play sometimes moves through.
I'd just like to say, but it's not signposty. It's
No,
not like,
not at all.
hold on a moment, listen to the music, there's something going to happen. It's nothing like that at all.
No.
It's so subtle, and I think it just really just elevates the whole feeling, as you're rightly saying, because they're little snapshots, aren't they? Every scene is a snapshot of that moment in time, and then we come in of it and we come out of it, and I think the music just really helps to guide that.
And it brings lightness as well. And it
Yeah.
brings darkness as well.
Yeah. I ought to remind everybody, I know it is also about a child being murdered, but it's also very funny in places, but it's not all doom and gloom, is it? There's definitely light moments in it, and there's definitely humour. We're not coming to watch something where it's completely doom and gloom, although the subject matter is obviously quite difficult. The brilliant writing, however, ensures that the lightness is there in the right times. Well, it's on from the 23rd to the 27th of April in the main stage. You can get your tickets via the normal place on the website, www.putneyartstheatre.org.uk. Hurry along and do that now. Thank you so much, guys. That was
Thank you.
jolly,
Thank
wasn't it?
you.
And I'm just looking at the time thinking, we better get in the auditorium for our run through. Otherwise we don't have my Frances. She will. She does that. Thank you, my love.
This is a real Putney Theatre Company production. Do share the podcast with your friends and take a look at our website, searching online for the Putney Theatre Company. So that's it for now. See you next time.